Hi, welcome to the Cinematography Salon Podcast, a show about celebrating cinematography and inspiring both the current and next generation of visual artists, exploring the latest trends, techniques, technologies, and culture, and featuring exclusive interviews with some of the most talented and innovative cinematographers working today. Hey everyone, welcome to the Cinematography Salon Podcast. My name is Peter Pascucci, and I am joined by my co-host, Ava Benjamin Shorr. Today, we are thrilled to be sitting down with the incredibly talented director, writer, and a true artist, Andrew Thomas Huang. Huang is a Grammy-nominated music video director, and his collaborations include Björk, FKA Twigs, and Tom York, among many others. His films have been commissioned by and exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Sydney Opera House, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. Inspired by his Chinese heritage and queer Asian mythology and folklore, Huang's work is a captivating exploration of diverse narratives and visual storytelling. Andy, we are so incredibly excited and honored to be talking with you today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm going to pass it over to Ava to start the questions. And yeah, we just can't wait to dive into some of your work and your process.
Yeah, Andy, it's really good to see you. And, I've been really excited for our conversation. And I do remember a long time ago hearing a story that related to how you got started as a music video and commercial director. And I think it was related to that short you did called Dollface, which is, I think, something,
oh my God.
Yeah, which I think is something that you made in film school or in college, if I remember.
Yeah.
Would you be open to sharing that story?
Oh, yeah. Wow. So I rarely talk about this because I started making it when I was 19 and I was in my dorm. I was at USC and I was in the art school studying drawing and painting. And I was also PAing and helping out on the film projects at USC just to get experience. I was doing production design on some of the grad school films. And I think I just quickly realized that I had all the tools I needed to just make my own films because I wasn't in the film school exactly, but being adjacent to it, I learned that USC would own anything you made in the program. So I just did it totally independently in my dorm and shot it, in a studio that I got a favor at. And I did visual effects on it for a year. And I started this process in 2005. And then I didn't finish the film till 2006 or 2007. YouTube was started in 2005, if I'm correct. So YouTube was only 2 years old and they would only feature 5 videos a week. So when I put it on the internet, it was my first experience with virality. It was the first time. It was really overwhelming and it pretty much launched my career because the week I graduated, the first 2 meetings I had, one was with J.J. Abrams and the second one was anonymous content. And then, Endeavor Agency at the time wanted to sign me. And so I think that was the first nudge I got to direct at all. And I wanted to make movies, but I wasn't writing. So I thought I would follow the track of my heroes like Spike Jonze and Chris Cunningham, who made their careers visually as music video directors. So that's kind of how I started. So that's the story of that short film.
That's really interesting. Weirdly enough, I actually interned at Anonymous Content in 2010 or 11 or something.
Oh my God, get out. Wow.
Yeah, but what was really interesting at that time was that I remember, because as an intern, you're just kind of you're a roach. You're just kind of everywhere, just doing whatever. And so I would overhear conversations between agents and I would kind of see, the printer was in the room with all the interns and stuff. And we would deliver all the printouts to agents and stuff. But weekly, there would be a new YouTube director that they wanted to sign. And it was the hot person, So it was that moment where it's anything that went viral, they were just trying to latch onto that. And that's so interesting because I didn't realize that you were part of that. I did know that Dollface was viral a long time ago, but that's so interesting now. That almost aligns.
Oh my God. Yeah, we were all part of the first wave of YouTube filmmaking, I guess, right? So wild. I wonder if we crossed paths there.
Yeah.
It was the internet was so radically different back then. It was such a new thing. In fact, when I signed with Endeavor Agency, they had a new media agent. And the idea of making content for the internet was so novel and kind of doubtful. Everyone dubious. Everyone was it felt like an add-on. No one really took it seriously at that time. And we were still watching DVDs. When I was sending the film out to film festivals, I was still burning it onto beta SP tape, and digibeta.
Yeah.
you know, and remember with Out of Box,
Yeah.
Yeah, I was sending the film out without a box. Like, it was ancient history.
So wild. So
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear a little bit about your kind of origin, going to USC, fine art background, and then how that turned into the directing career that you are in now. Because I think the story that Ava brought up is so interesting in terms of like some of the origin, and I would love to hear whatever other background you'd like to share to give people an idea of your story.
Gosh, I don't know. I think I have to go back earlier because, my mom pretty much spent her life taking care of my family and working at a Chinese restaurant. And so she pushed me to do the arts because I think she always wanted to. So I was really lucky to have parents that supported me in that way. And I was just a huge fan of the Muppets and like Jim Henson, specifically like the fantasy films of the 80s. I wanted to make films like that. And so I wanted to get into like animatronics and puppetry and visual effects. And that's kind of how I ended up dabbling in digital video as a young kid. But then I was really lucky to have a neighbor who put me in touch with an effects studio called Blue Sky Visual Effects that was in Marina del Rey. And this woman gave some really great advice. She was like, if you want to work in this industry, you should learn how to draw because the technology will change all the time, but your eye won't. So I ended up taking art classes at Art Center in Pasadena, and that's where I learned figure drawing. And so I feel like that was the first time I ever took a discipline extremely seriously and just got good enough to be dangerous, And that work translated really well to, like, I noticed that the better I got at drawing, the more I was able to use tools like After Effects and Photoshop to a degree that I was able to do my own world building, I guess, for pretty low budget on my own. So by the time I got to USC, I wanted to study art. And I took art really seriously, but I wanted to be near the film school so that I could absorb whatever was there and eventually get a career in film. And as I was there, I think I had the confidence to start doing this stuff on my own and do like bedroom filmmaking, basically. And visual effects was kind of like my secret weapon, I guess. So that's kind of what led up to making that first short film. And then it was, of course, the advent of YouTube that really kickstarted my foray into at least getting representation. I mean, but before that, I didn't think I would be a director. I thought I wanted to work at a visual effects studio. But in 2007 and 2008, during the crash, all these effects studios were like folding. And when I shared my reel with a lot of effects HR people, they were like, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to be a rotoscope artist or do you want to be a composer? And everyone was like, how do I fit you in my pipeline? And then I quickly realized that I had my own things to say. And I think even being recognized, just getting the opportunities via YouTube and having agencies and managers and commercial reps being like, hey, do you want to direct? It was like a reckoning of asking myself if I had the self-confidence to direct because, frankly, there were many people like me directing and I felt I had to get over my own insecurities to just muster the confidence to say, okay, I'm going to direct professionally. And I realized through making that short film that directing is simply just, whether you're one person or 50, it's just about having the vision and communicating it.
That's so beautiful. I was really curious to hear your thoughts on identity in general. And I was really, really moved by your essay for Hey True magazine on the origins of your name. And as a queer person, I don't know, just your style of writing and the way that you peeled back the layers of your name and your identity really resonated with me. And I was curious just to hear about your perspective on identity and how it holds significance for you personally, both in terms of like your cultural background, maybe your sexual identity, or just how identity influences you as sort of a professional director and artist in your work.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm also like a new writer, so I appreciate you mentioning that essay. It's not something that I don't often write stuff like that. And the reason I wrote it is because my friend used to curate HU magazine and asked me to write a piece about, and so that was kind of what came out. But yeah, I don't know, like I think when I was growing up, my mom worked at a Chinese restaurant, but she also was, she was a social worker and created a therapy clinic for Asian immigrants. I guess that was my mom's activism. And so I think from a young age, she always, I guess, like impressed upon me the importance of representation. And she would send me to like Asian American film festivals and stuff just to like educate me on, I guess, the underrepresentation that exists. And I think as a kid, I really hated it. I honestly hated it. I think I was always, I did grow up on a diet of Hollywood movies. and of mostly white content. And I think that when I saw movies made by my own community, I was always maybe insecure about just how indie and scrappy they were. And I also just wasn't used to seeing people that looked like me on screen. And so I think I had this like dark mirror projection happening where I just like couldn't quite accept it. But then movies from Asia were like a different story, which we didn't consume a lot. But when I did, it was like a different paradigm and it was more palatable for some reason. Not even to mention like gay movie. I mean, like I had my favorite gay films growing up. Like But I'm a Cheerleader was like me and my friends was like our favorite movie in high school. But like marrying these two things like was not even conceivable for me until fairly recently, you know? So I guess my whole own relationship to representation was always a fraught one because no one likes to be pigeonholed and no one wants to be put in a niche. And it also frankly wasn't cool and it wasn't safe to even be proud of your identity. Frankly, before like 2010, 2015, you know, like it's just been a long journey and it's kind of hard to know where to start the story of that. But I would say maybe it starts with my mom because it was her activism and her social, I guess the social consciousness that she raised us with. Maybe when asked to address my identity, I guess the first place you might start is your name. And I never liked my Chinese name. I always thought it was really ugly. So I thought I would actually explore the name and where the name comes from. You know, when we work in our fields, our name, it's our brand. I go by Andy, but there were like 3 Andrews on my street. And there's also, if you Google Andrew Wang, you just get a bunch of like doctors and like Chinese kids sitting at piano benches. So that's why I put my middle name, Andrew Thomas Huang. I also learned that in Chinese culture, it's actually common for people to change their names multiple times throughout their life. And that's actually common in many other cultures where your name is not fixed. So I think that maybe as it pertains to one's career, I think it can be helpful and cool to change your name because I think it does change the way you feel about yourself and the way you are perceived and the way you... I mean, something really sad is that there are a lot of Asian actors and professionals who have changed their names to white names intentionally. Like having a 1-syllable Chinese last name was never cool. I feel like proudly wearing your name is something maybe I've learned to do and continue to learn to do. And I think it has everything to do with your self-confidence as a professional in a creative field, because this is a field where there's no train tracks to ensure your elevation in your field. It's the Wild West. It is asymmetrical and unfair. And so our name is like the first thing that you wear into this battlefield called the entertainment industry. So maybe that's why I focused on my name, I guess, in that essay.
I think, yeah, it's so inspiring. I mean, to hear you talk about the way that your mom would expose you to Asian cinema, but it didn't feel right. And then how over the course of your career, you've reclaimed that. And when I see your projects like Kiss of the Rabbit God, it's like that sort of ownership of your whole heritage and everything is so palpable and so beautiful and artistically rendered. And yeah, I just think it's really interesting to hear that backstory and to give more context to this journey. It's really inspiring.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, growing up with gay cinema too, there's so much gay cinema, but it was always from a Western lens. So just trying to marry these things alone, you know, I didn't have the bravery to do it until my mid-career, until 2018, when we started the project, that film. So again, it's 2024? Like, it feels like it's still a new journey for me, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's so many jumping off points from that story. I mean, it resonates with me on so many levels. I think one place I wanted to start was talking about how you've been embracing all of the different aspects of yourself. I also noticed, revisiting a lot of your work in preparation for this, you've also in the past few years started to put yourself in your work. And I'm really curious to know what that's felt like to be your own subject and what that process is like for you.
Oh, it's terrifying. It's terrifying. It's awful. But also, like, sometimes putting yourself in your own work is almost like the only next step, maybe. And it gives me respect and admiration for anyone else in front of a camera. And maybe even just trying to do a little bit more exploring in the performing arts, just because I think it helps me as a director. You know, I also put myself in some of my photographs because it was a pandemic. So I was just like in quarantine and there wasn't a better time than to photograph myself. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's comfortable, but we don't do this to be comfortable. There's a lot of other things we could do. I think that maybe as artists here, we are making our work to reveal ourselves to ourselves. And so what better way than to step in front of the lens sometimes?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like, hearing you say that kind of reminded me of something I think about a lot, in that I chose to go down a career path and a life that is behind the camera. Like, I don't want to model. I don't want to act. I don't want to be in front of the camera. And yet, because of my gender identity and my sexuality and the weird Venn diagram of my career and all those things, people I know are interested and fascinated by me. And thus I've been like put into a spotlight that I'm reticent to go into. But I also know that the exposure of that is important. And I've learned, like you, what it's like to be in front of a camera and the vulnerability in that. So I almost think that if you, perhaps this is too general, but like if you have more of a minoritized perspective in like film or art, you almost have to be ready to also be as present in front of the camera, because people are going to want to know what your identity is and what you're bringing. And it's almost like they're going to want to really dive into those aspects of your identity, even if you aren't really that interested in it.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the double-edged conundrum of being at the bleeding edge of representation in your career field. Like, the visibility and your intersections are your asset. They were not always. I mean, they were only until very recently.
Right.
Like, very, very, very recently. And I think it's taken people like us active effort to see your intersectionality as an asset. Like, it takes active work to reverse it, because I used to think of it as a negative and as a drawback. And I mean, at the same time, the numbers still don't lie. Like, there's still a resistance, obviously, to progress in so many ways. But I think if you're going to be at the vanguard of any movement, and if there are not other people like you in your field, you are inevitably going to be visible. And that burden of having to speak on behalf of your community may very well fall upon you, which is unfair and like dumb, because as an artist, you should be able to make your art and like not be burdened with that. But yes, as we've experienced, this is just what happens. And maybe you could work it to your advantage.
Would you be willing to speak a little bit more about what you just mentioned about how art is often a means of us revealing ourselves to ourselves? I feel like that's not talked about very much. And I think that it's so true. And it's such like a elusive thing.
Yeah.
The way that we kind of like package these things in real time, and then years and years later, maybe access some element of it that meant something way, way deeper to us that our subconscious was not aware of at the time that we created it. So yeah, I'd just be interested in the context of your work, if you've ever had those moments where you're actively making something and creating, and it isn't until much later that you realize why.
Oh, yeah. Whoa. That's juicy. I don't know. I mean, I think art at its purest is play, serious play. And I think by being playful, by being in like a childlike state of creating, it's inherently very intimate. And was it Celine Sciamma that said art is a transmission of intimacies? So by transmitting what you were playing with, when you finish the work and you share it, you're transmitting an intimacy. And I don't believe that all art making has to be that deep. I believe that creating is not really that deep. I think that not all art is political, but I think all art can be politicized. And I think that for me, the most rewarding thing is to make something and for you to feel changed when it's done. And then I hope that when you share it, it changes other people. I mean, that's what makes it magic, right? Is to affect something from afar. It's just like hard to confess on a podcast, but maybe I'll just say it. Well, I think with the Kiss of the Rabbit God film, I had a moment where, because I was asked by Nowness, they asked me to make a film about sex, because sex was like their theme. They had like the previous year, the theme was beauty. So the year they asked me to participate, they're like, make a film with the theme about sex. And me being kind of like prudish, I was like, ooh, like, I came up with some like very abstract ideas. mostly centered around women, frankly. And they were like, well, no, you're a queer Asian director, let's like make a film about queer Asian identity. And I was like, oh, I don't want to be burdened with that. But I'm like, okay, I never tried it, so let me just try. And I was thinking about the few queer Asian films that I even knew of, like Happy Together, barely any that I could name. I was like, well, I don't want this to be a romance story, but I had the idea of this Chinese god visiting this Chinese busboy at night because my family ran a Chinese restaurant. And long story short, I knew that the film had to end in a sex scene, but I didn't want to like literally shoot a sex scene. I wanted to shoot like a symbolic sex scene. So that's what you see at the end of the film. And when we were shooting it, you know, I have my actors in like red pleather and bondage and stuff. And I was like, on set, I was like, oh no, is this going to be stupid? And I actually got I kind of had to like go away and like cry in the back room before we shot it because I was so terrified it was going to be dumb. But then I just kind of got angry actually because I was like, you know, I do music videos for a living and my job is to make people look hot and to make everyone look like $1 million. So why can't I do that for people that look like me? So we just went ahead, we shot it, and it was a risk that I took. And I think by the end of it, there's still things about the film that I wish I could do differently. I see mistakes. I see maybe decisions that could have been better. But after the film, when we showed it to the community and got such a positive response, it literally changed the way I started dressing. It changed the way I interacted with my own community. Like it changed my confidence. So maybe that's like an example where making a work can literally change the way you physically behave or dress or interact with people. So I think that making art at its best can peel back the layers of armor maybe that we've developed so that you can be your truest version of yourself. And I hope that a work of art can do that for other people, even just receiving a work from I mean, I know that other work's done that to me. You know, I see a movie and it changes me, and you know, that movie kind of infects my consciousness and I'm not the same person after it. So I think that's maybe what I hope is the effect of what we do ultimately.
So beautifully said. I think it's such a good example. That film is so brilliant and so elegant and so timeless, and it's a beautiful, beautiful piece.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that makes me really emotional hearing that. It makes me think a lot about my own journey. I think that I still to this day am overcoming a deficit of self-worth. I think I've just carried this idea that there's no value in my experience, that it's like less than. And I don't know, I'm really inspired by that leap that you took into like the unknown and to trust yourself and feel the change is like something that I don't know, I'm so moved by that. And I guess when I do look at your work, I do get this immense feeling of like someone who is living in their power. At least that is the outward projection I see from viewing your work. And it's so inspiring. And I guess for me or for listeners who are like still finding themselves, do you have advice that you would give to people who are still on that journey? Or maybe, you know, you are too.
Yeah, I'm definitely still on the journey. And thank you for sharing all that. I certainly, I know you get it. And I feel like, I think that it all begins with being alone in your thoughts. I think that film is this weird extrovert-introvert paradox where what we do as filmmakers is very lonely, but at the same time, we crave collaboration and teamwork and community, which is why we work on set and why we make films at all. Like I could have chosen to be, I thought for a second I wanted to be a painter, but then that's just too solitary for me. Even though I consider myself an introvert, I like desperately need people. But I think sitting in your power is a phrase I think we've heard more and more. And I think it's kind of vague and hard to understand sometimes how to do that. And also if we perceive someone to be doing that, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're confident or that they have it all. It's sitting in your power, I guess, is an action that requires sitting in discomfort. I guess sitting in your power is not necessarily being like, yeah, I'm the shit. Sitting in your power is more like, this is terrifying, but I'm going to put myself out there anyways. Because if I don't, the stasis of staying quiet is too suffocating. Like someone asked me recently, like, what's your inspiration? And I was like, I never know how to answer that question. But I realized like my inspiration is also just being mad. Like I think a lot of my inspiration is because I'm so disgruntled about the state of the world that like I can't help but like just making shit is a way of coping. I think sometimes like making shit is a way of survival. So sitting in your power is also a kind of form of survival. Because if you don't, you're going to like literally be erased and life is just too painful otherwise. I also think in terms of sitting in one's own power and I guess creating work, I think a lot about how, you know, because I could have shot that scene in the Rabbit God and maybe it would have failed. Maybe it did fail. I mean, there are ways in which it failed, but like I think as artists, especially in the age of social media, we are putting our work out there publicly for people to look at it and judge it. So like I have such talented friends who sometimes maybe decided not to release their work. And I just think it's a shame because obviously I think you should exercise discretion sometimes on what you do put out there. But I think that for the most part, when you're starting out, taking that risk and getting feedback and failing publicly is part of the work. I think failing publicly is actually a form of sitting in your power, I guess you could say. And then when you get to a point where you actually make a work that really sings, that like really cuts through, then go back and you can just like remove all the, like only show your best work, right? And I say that to all my cinematographer friends all the time. I'm like, only show your best work because that, actually my career took off because I removed a lot of the work I did 5 years prior. That's why I don't talk about my first short film a lot, because 5 years later I made something better that really did kickstart my career. And so I think you can edit your portfolio to be really strong. But the truth is, like, as artists, 90% of the work we make is bad. That's just a fact because you're a human being. But you, as your taste and your skill set improves, you can curate your work and show only the best of what you're capable of. And that will only help you. But that doesn't mean you need to be afraid of failure. In fact, the more you work, the less afraid you are of failure. And so I guess my advice is to fail fearlessly and let failure lose its sting. And I think failure is part of sitting in your power because the more you do it, the less fazed you are by it and the more you can take risks that actually move the needle for you and for people like you.
Yeah, I almost feel like something that you're alluding to in different ways is like, I think is this idea that as a person and as an artist, there is no static version of you, right? It's like ever changing, like your name can change and in your sexuality, your gender identity can change over the course of your life. And even your work as an artist can shift and morph, and the thing that was relevant to you 5 years ago could not be relevant at all. And I've gone through massive shifts in my own personal style where the things I've shot years ago, I'm like, that is just a different planet that I'm not on, you know?
Oh yeah, totally. People always talk about identity like it's this fixed thing. It sure isn't, and it shouldn't ever be. So I think when people are like, oh, I want to find my voice as an artist, it's like, well, it's not like an arrival point. It's not a fixed thing. Like, I guess finding your voice as an artist is to maybe just like lean passionately into what you're geeking out on right now.
Yeah.
But that's going to change. And there are trends, right? Like, it's interesting talking about cinematography trends, you know, which I think we could like totally nerd out about aspect ratios or like lens choices or color combination, lighting combinations. I mean, we certainly look back at work made in the 2010s and we're like, whoa, like that was a time. Color grade trends, lifted shadows or what, I don't know, like, and that changes. But I think what doesn't change maybe are your ideas and your fascinations and your comportment, if that's a word, of you as a collaborator, your personality. Yeah, I don't know. I think that you have to allow room for you to change with the time and that you have to allow room for all the seasons of your life to shift, I guess, as an artist.
Yeah, it's wow. It's such good practical advice what you said about failing and not being afraid to share work, but then revisiting it and curating it. I've never heard that explained in that way. And I think it's obviously comes from a lot of experience and success. So it's really cool to hear. One question that Ava and I were kind of curious about, and I'd love to hear you talk about, was this idea of maintaining your artistic signature when working on commercial work or working on like commission projects. And your work is so singular and unique and beautiful and risky. And I think that, yeah, if there's anyone that I would love to hear from about how to manage labels or brands or creative directors that you have to answer to, like, what is some advice that you have for keeping that artistic voice and navigating some of those challenges?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, first thing I would say is to repeat is just like, I do a lot of things that are like off brand to make money, and I just don't share them, like it's fine to do jobs for the Mario coins and then you just don't share it. So that's okay. That's what I mean when like making art doesn't have to be deep. Just like an actor, you play a role, you're like, wasn't my best work. I didn't love working with that director. Like, I'm just not going to put on my reel. So step one is just to be prolific, like do a lot. And then step two is curating, right? Like pick and choose what you've done that you like. I kind of made a post about this recently, but we all know like the Spike Jonze, Chris Cunningham, Michel Gondry DVD set that we all nerded out about in the 2000s and 2010s, and it's on every creative director's desk. It's like the canon of music video commercial directing. And like, I think it created this idea that, I mean, it still remains to me the North Star of what directing and what short form content can be. But it's also a lie, because this is not the 90s, it's not the 2000s, it's not the 2010s. Even in the 2010s, after the crash in 2008, we all felt the climate shift where advertising is not creative. Creativity is a corporate word. So when we talk about harnessing your voice in a commercial field, I have very low expectations these days. I don't have the expectation. And actually that kind of frees me sometimes. I can show up into a job. It's not about me. But occasionally a project comes along where you do have the flexibility, or you're lucky to have a creative director who believes in you, which is like extremely rare. And then you can, I guess, put yourself in it. I'm not sure what my advice is here, but I'm just saying like those opportunities are rare, and they may come rarely. They may never come at all. And in that case, that's when you need to stop waiting for the right gig to come to you, and you actually need to be self-generating. When I first started my career, I thought I would maybe partner with a screenwriter to come up with material that I could direct, but it never happened. So that's when I started writing. But I didn't have the maturity to start writing until, frankly, 2016. So some actors, I know the most genius thing they can do is to write their own material, because no one's going to write it for them. So maybe that's what I mean when I say your ideas are the thing that kind of make you uniquely you. And I think that there was no material out there for me to direct because none of them shared my intersectionality or my point of view. I mean, I realized as I've gotten older why I liked certain movies or why I liked certain color palettes or textures. And then I realized like, oh, I like it because it's really gay. Or like, I like it because it's like creepy, or like, I think that you kind of just have to nerd out about the things that you like and be a bit unapologetic about it. I think like part of having a coherent voice is to be a big nerd about what you really love and to infuse it in the work. You may be passionate about mushrooms, or you may be passionate about indigo, or like cooking, or I have no idea, like whatever weird obscure thing you're into, you kind of just have to unapologetically put it in the work. Or maybe sometimes it's not a thing, it's not a noun, it's like a process. I think that we're so results focused in our field. Like my latest Earth Eater video, that's actually how the collaboration started, was I think we were trying to come up with ideas, and then we just said, you know what, let's just not focus on the result. Let's focus on a process. And so I talked to Earth Eater about what is something that you could do. Like, I'm really interested, I think because I've done post-production for most of my career, I'm so familiar with the work after you've shot something and how painful and important that work is. But then when I work with dancers and performance artists or actors, I realize how important the work is ahead of the shoot. All the work is done, all the rehearsing is done ahead of the shoot. So I was really interested in prepping something for camera. And that's when Alex, Earth Eater, had told me that she was actually trying to break glass with her voice. So I was like, okay, well, what if we make a video where you practice breaking the glass at home and maybe even film yourself doing it, and that becomes part of the video. So it was process that was the thing I was interested in. I wasn't fascinated with glass breaking, but I was fascinated with the process of rehearsing it over and over. And then we got really into the physics of glass breaking and like how you need a certain age of glass, certain imperfections, certain glass shapes, maybe even the glass at a certain temperature. Then you get like really geeky, but that's actually what makes the work cool. So I think leaning into your particular fascinations is what will make the work uniquely you, I think.
I mean, on a side note, Andy, I mean, I'm not just blowing smoke here, but that Earth Eater video might be one of my favorite videos ever.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
What is funny about saying that in this conversation is that I would say my favorite video ever is Chris Cunningham's All Is Full of Love for Björk. And after hearing now that you like his work, I'm actually like thinking about how interesting it is that I love those two videos. And there's something about them, the like romance and the creepiness and the luxuriousness of the visuals from those are like, there's something connected, even though they're like 20 years apart, you know?
Thanks. It means a lot. I mean, I worship Chris Cunningham. Of the DVD set, that was his work was the template for me. And I think it's because it was the most queer, it was the most erotic, and All Full of Love is like super queer. You know, Björk's making out with herself. She's a cyborg. It's like transhumanist. It's heavenly. And that video changed that video was the reason I made my first short film. I was directly sourcing that. I've also tried to be really choosy of the artists that I work with now. I feel like I've been trying to work with artists who channel that kind of femininity and that kind of like-mindedness, and Earth Eater to me is an artist that embodies that. And also the funny thing, this is like a tangent, but like my movie fell apart this year. I've been working on my movie for 7 years. It fell apart during the strike financially. And so I was really grief-stricken. I had like a very physical grief reaction to it. But I also think I got in a headspace of like, okay, I'm just going to make with whatever I have. And we didn't have very much money for this Earth Eater video. And LA locations are so expensive, but we found this workout studio with these really ugly flats, and like it was kind of creepy. It had like a built-in kitchen and it was ugly. It was also like a place where you could do talk shows like The View. You know, it was just like really ugly flats, but it was very like late 90s. And maybe because there was this voyeuristic quality of filming Earth Eater breaking these glasses, I couldn't help but think of a camcorder in front of her and a TV. And then it became almost like an erotic thriller. And then like coincidentally, Laura Marians Gonzalez, who was shooting it, told me about a podcast she was listening to about erotic thrillers in the 90s called You Must Remember This. And in the podcast, You Must Remember This, this amazing essayist basically reads her writing deconstructing the erotic thriller genre of the 90s as a phenomenon that arrived pretty much in response to the AIDS crisis and the Reagan era, where sex became not just permissible, but dangerous and fun and scary, particularly for straight people. And so I watched Basic Instinct and was thinking about Cronenberg's Crash and Lost Highway, and that became kind of the language of the Earth Eater video. It was almost like reinventing the language of, I guess, the erotic thriller in the context of the song Crushing, which is about crushing glass, crushing hearts. And so it became like, we didn't really know what we were making. It was just kind of more this brainwave of things we're into. Erotic thrillers, the physics of what it takes to break a glass with your voice, which is insane. When she does it, for real, it's loud. And her voice like reverberates in the glass. It's very magical. And everyone's just like holding their breath because it's so physically exhausting. And she did it once within the first half an hour, but then we wanted to get it again on the Phantom camera, and doing it again took, I want to say, like 2 hours. Wow. And like the internet still, like I get a lot of comments of people that don't think it's real, which is crazy to me because we had like 6 witness cameras. But yeah, it's like all her. So that was kind of the background on that video and how we got there.
So brilliant. Hi, we are excited to announce our partnership with Laowa Lenses by Venus Optics. Laowa has had a long history of providing cinematographers with unique and state-of-the-art lens options, including their recent Proteus 2x anamorphic series, which remains the most accessible T2.0 option in the market for professional production. A big thank you to SanDisk for helping support our show as well as part of their Relentless Reliability campaign. The extreme portable solid-state drive has become an essential on film sets and a personal favorite of mine for how durable, reliable, and fast it is. SanDisk leads in drive and memory card technology, emphasizing not just storage, but everything worth keeping.
While we're talking about music videos, I had a question that might be a little tired at this point, but what made me think about it is like, I was a big nerd in college. I was obsessed with Chris Cunningham and Stanley Kubrick, and I remember reading how Chris Cunningham would generate ideas for music videos. He would like sit in front of a speaker, just close his eyes and let imagery come to him. And I'm just wondering, is there something that you do to generate ideas for music videos?
I definitely have like an idea. I don't have like a concrete bank, but I do have an idea bank generally in my head of images I've been wanting to do, but I don't necessarily save them for music videos. I think I've grown sensitive to the fact that as much as I love videos, I don't own anything as a director. And I think that's a shame. And I think that I try to save those ideas for myself now, for my own narrative. But I do have certain things I want to try, certainly with a certain kind of artist or song, but I think that I keep it close to my chest. I've actually had one musician was trying to be very generous and was like, do you have anything you've just been wanting to do and just pair it with this music? And that almost killed the process for me, because I think what I genuinely enjoy is when me and the musician are coming up with something together that is motivated by their music. Like if I'm just coming up with an idea and then I just pair it with a random song, that's like not rewarding to me. Like it feels almost too convenient, or it feels a bit haphazard. I guess when I work with a musician, I genuinely want to know where their heart's at, what they wanted from their song or their album, what they were exploring, and then that helps me generate ideas for them. So I think that's how I like to work, because that to me is true collaboration. It's weird. It's almost like I feel more set free when I know that I'm in sync creatively or spiritually with that artist, rather than just being asked to do whatever. If I'm being asked to do whatever, then I'd rather own it. I'd rather be mine in terms of IP.
Have there been any examples where you felt IP of yours has been maybe exploited or anything in that way when it comes to like music videos or things like that?
I mean, I could say yes, but also let's be real. Like music videos are part of pop culture. Pop culture is recycled. I think to claim ownership when you're operating in a space of anything is a little presumptuous. I mean, I definitely learned my lesson, I think, with the whole Lil Nas X Twigs thing. All I have to say about that is there's a lot of information people don't know that wasn't public that I just can't share. But what I learned is that I think in the music industry and in our industries, we have to separate the creative act and making stuff, which is inherently appropriative and collagey, and ideas get mixed in all the time. We need to separate that process, which is very organic, from the capitalistic monetizing and rewarding of who gets more views, who gets more eyeballs, who gets bigger marketing budgets. That's all wielded by the record labels and by, just like our industry is a separate thing. And I think we need to always be critical of who holds the keys to the money that pays us for the gigs that we're hired on. That's a separate conversation.
Yeah, I think that's so smart.
We can let artists be artists.
100%. I was curious, just speaking about being prolific and everything, I wanted to kind of hear about your collaborations with Björk, and I'd love to hear about how long that relationship has existed and some of the backstory maybe of that relationship, and any special moments you want to share, maybe from like traveling and getting to know Björk and getting to create so much beautiful work together.
Yeah, I mean, she's been the collaboration of my life. She's a very special lady. And so this is like Vimeo era. I made a short film called Solid Cyst and put it on Vimeo, which Carlos Lopez Estrada helped me on, which is the reason why you and I know each other, Ava. And now Carlos is an amazing, he's been doing so well. I'm really excited to see how well Carlos is doing. But put this like short, weird, non-narrative experimental film online, and it was a Vimeo staff pick. And then I got an email from one of Björk's music producers. His name's Mark Bell. He actually produced Homogenic. And he was like, I sent your film to Björk. And I was like, yeah, right, because I'm like the biggest Björk fan. And she was like, my Heartbreak albums were like Vespertine and Homogenic and in high school. And I was just the hugest fan. And so basically when her manager reached out, I was at the pavilions on Melrose and Vine, and I like wept in the grocery store parking lot. And I couldn't believe it, because up until that point, I was doing really lame jobs. Like I was doing really small advertising gigs that were not creative at all. And I just felt almost like, wow, even the shitty jobs got me here. Even the jobs I didn't want to do somehow led to this point. And then I did my first video for her called Mutual Core from Biophilia in 2012. And then the last video we did together was in 2022. It's been a 10-year collaboration. The thing that I'm most grateful to her is that, like, she's a hero of mine, and I've always wanted to do my best work for her. And there were times where I felt, whether it was parameters or whatever, I couldn't always do the best job. And there were times where I felt like I maybe failed as a collaborator, but she kept coming back. And I actually think that's the kind of grace that I've never experienced before, where someone of her level is willing to trust me again, even though I fucked up. Having longevity in your working relationships is rare. And I think in our gig economy, where we're expected to like get along and work smoothly after like 2 days of working with each other, is unrealistic. Most other jobs, you are interviewed vigorously by an HR person, and there's evaluations, and you kind of learn to work together. It doesn't always happen in our field. So for her to kind of entrust me over and over was a gift. And I feel like that was the only way that I could learn and grow, was through that continual trust. So I'm really grateful to that. I also learned from her what it's like to really be around someone who, like a true artist that soaks in whatever she's vibing on. Like, she did an album called Volnicura a few years ago where I did most of my work with her. And the album colors are like lavender and neon yellow. And she like painted her Brooklyn flat. She like painted her walls and had lavender candles everywhere. And I was like, this is what it means to be like a serious play. She's being serious about vibing. Like, if you're into a color, go hard on it. Or like, even rest. She protects her rest fiercely. And I think we're, especially cinematographers and people who work on set, like, we live in this go, go, go world. But to be alone and quiet, that's where all the gold is. That's where all of everything she comes up with is from her play and her time with her family, her time alone. So I think that I learned good habits of being an artist from her.
The work that the two of you have done together is so iconic. All of it is so brilliant. And I love even the VR. I don't know, it's all of it is just so singular and reflective of her craft. And it's so much fun to watch.
Thank you. Can we talk about cinematography? I want to know what you guys are. I know this is a fairly new podcast. What's on your minds in the cinematography landscape, or for yourselves as cinematographers? I'm curious to talk about that.
Ava, I love how we're being
that's a big question.
I know. To be honest, I thought we were going to talk more about that.
I know. I feel a little guilty, but we love talking about other stuff. do you agree, Ava? I mean, what are your thoughts?
I mean, we definitely can. I mean, there's nothing is off limits,
nothing is off limits.
I think
maybe I'm like the other way around. I'm like want to geek out about. I'm just curious what you are geeking. I'm curious about what you guys are geeking out about, whatever it is.
We're being so curmudgeon-y about the cinematography stuff. I think it's so fun. It's one thing I will say, and this is not at all getting to the question, but it's so refreshing to talk to you, because it's just nice to have the director's sensibility and the artist's sensibility on the show, and to be able to talk about some of this stuff is such a treat for me personally. I love it.
Sure.
But yeah, Ava, I don't know, go off. What do you think? Cinematography. I mean, I was curious, like, I definitely had a question just about what you look for in a cinematographer, which is something that I'm always very curious to hear from directors that are as successful as you are. And I also think what you brought up about trends is really something we could totally talk about as well. Like, we did get into that on one episode once, just like advertising trends, commercial trends with cinematography. Like everything that you mentioned is so true. And I also like was thinking of some others as well, like POV, the trend of film, all sorts of stuff. But yeah, what do you think?
I want to lead by saying that from where I sit, I think cinematographers, I think it's like the hottest career. I think it's like so cool. I feel like every cinematographer I know, this combination of artistry and gear and working with your crew, being on set, traveling, like, it's so active. And I find that very sexy and cool. And maybe I say that because I think from where I am, I feel like I'm mostly making pitch decks. And I'm usually at home. My time on set is such a tiny fraction of what I do. Most of my time is pacing around in my pajamas, like making Word documents. And whereas I feel like being on set is what I live for. And it's what every cinematographer I know is this unicorn hybrid of artistry and almost like military, like adventuring, just like work. I don't know. I admire cinematographers so much, and I maybe secretly wish I was one, even though I'm really not. I don't feel confident arming myself with a camera, but I guess in terms of like what I look for, I really think it depends on the project actually, because every project has different needs. I try to let the subject matter dictate the casting of the crew. I think I look for, forgive me if this is like inaccurate in your eyes, but I kind of almost look at the range of the spectrum of skill sets similar to the way I look at production designers. For example, I feel like there are production designers who are incredibly good at construction and set builds, but maybe lacking on the details or the flavor or the dressing, whereas I know production designers who are so good on like vibe and like the dressing and the style and the world building, but they're not so good at construction and the managerial aspects of being a production designer. I feel like similarly for cinematography, I know cinematographers who are very painterly, who they just have an incredible eye, and therefore they have like great style. But as people, they may not be the most sensitive towards story or process or conversations. I think that it's almost like a sensorial brain where like, I know some cinematographers, they have such a good eye, but they're just not necessarily as strong maybe in the narrative sense. And then I have the reverse where there are cinematographers who are so good at conversation, so good at process and narrative, but maybe the more formalistic aspects of being a cinematographer are kind of lacking, whether it's technical. So it's almost like a divide between technical versus conceptual. And then I also know cinematographers that are just so, I think that there's something, what I love when I see in cinematography is when how do I explain this? I love it when the camera feels really embodied. Like you can feel the body of the cinematographer in the action, in the space. Almost like the cinematographer is a dancer in the space with whatever's happening. And that's a kind of presence that I don't think you can teach. Sometimes you might be lured by the way something's lit, but other times you're like, whoa, like the way where we are moving with the action is so visceral, And I think it might have to do with like a great Steadicam operator too that you work with. But I just think where you put the camera as like a living body in the scene is like a whole nother category when it's done well. So I kind of maybe oscillate between that triangular of look and then process and personality and then the staging or the movement of the camera. I kind of like look for all those different things and I try and prioritize whatever that is for the job. On Earth Eater specifically, I worked with Laura Mary Gonzalez, who shot my first music video ever in 2007. She's the longest cinematographer I've worked with in my career, and I knew she would be perfect for Earth Eater. I really wanted to work with her on that because I knew that she could vibe on that wavelength and think more about process and break rules.
Okay, so I'm so glad that you talked about cinematography and not us, because that was really interesting. And I love the way you broke down different cinematographers. Like, to me, that's just a testament to how sensitive you are as like a person and an artist. And that makes me feel good that someone is at least looking at those things, because I do agree. I think it's easy in maybe just the current dialogue that we use to evaluate people and artists and cinematographers is like, who's the best, who's got the most likes. But I do agree that cinematographers are like directors and that they get obsessed with different things. And I think that our own like taste, our own experience and perspective gets infused into the way that we do something, whether it be collaborate or light a scene. But I totally agree with you. I think that it just happens to be that sometimes you are the person who's more like can just shoot the shit out of dialogue and narrative. And then there's some people that are incredible stylists that can light something to such a specific degree that it sings. And I feel good to hear that coming from you, because it's something that I think about. And sometimes I worry that I'm like trying to value the more subtle aspects of cinematography when it gets less likes. But I truly do think that work can be beautiful for so many different things. And maybe the only thing I have to say is that I just get sad that things that maybe are more process oriented or things that are more subtle or focus on dialogue often don't get as much maybe outward excitement or respect for. But I think they are extremely valuable. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think of documentaries, like, I feel like the presence and the time spent with your subjects, maybe that's what I mean when I say camera presence. To be there and to dedicate the love and time to your subject where they will trust you, that's something a cinematographer for doc, like if you have that, that's something you can't buy. That's like a personality thing. You need to have the spirit of someone who can spend the time with as an artist. I think your relationship to time is critical, and I think that cinematographers are artists, and I think that everyone's like a unique snowflake, and I think that in the quick rhythm of our gig economy, there are certain aesthetics and personalities that are privileged, and it sucks because it is unfair. I think there are qualities that are so important to being an artist that are just overlooked. And one of them is how you spend your time with your team, with your subjects, and also how you problem solve. This is all problem solving.
I love what you said earlier too. Like, I think it sounds like another method of selection when it comes to a cinematographer is that advice that you said earlier about be prolific, shoot a lot, develop your eye, but then only share your best stuff. And I imagine that from your perspective, you're probably able to discern very easily someone's skill set and that sort of triangle that you mentioned, if they have properly curated their work and if they have put only their best work forward. I imagine that's probably a pretty important element from the perspective of like a director selecting the cinematographer.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie. Like, when I look at someone's website or their Instagram, I'm quickly looking at the thumbnails, the choice of what's on the reel, what their values are, what kind of jobs they have done or aspire to do. I think we all know that, like, we all aspire to do things beyond what we've been given the opportunity to do. But I still think that what's on your website or on your reel still tells me who you are as a person. I mean, of course I've been wrong, especially when I hire for visual effects. I've had reels that were not that great, and then suddenly the artist is a dream to work with. And I've had people have fantastic reels and then are terrible to work with. So I think that you can't always judge from the work alone, but the work is my best indication. Give no other information what the vibe is, what they care about. And I guess all of us in this industry are putting messages in a bottle with our work, trying to attract the spiritually like-minded artists. And I think maybe that's what I encourage, I guess, DPs to do, is to put work that is spiritually attuned to their values and who they want to work with.
I love that.
Oh my gosh. You're saying so many things that make me happy. You know, we don't share a lot of the video, but I'm just nodding the whole time and smiling. I kind of want to go back a little bit to what you said about the director's label DVDs and that post that you made on Instagram. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because when you posted it, I immediately thought it was an interesting thing to talk about. I feel like the one thing that we didn't cover in this conversation was when you say, this is from your post, our task now is to make work that is transgressive in the present. What does that look like, and who's it made for? And you didn't, as far as I know, answer that question. But like, I also want to know, what do you mean by that?
It's a juicy one to end on. Well, yeah, I guess for anyone who is unfamiliar, me being bossy and loud on Instagram, I shared a screenshot of the DVD set of Spike Jonze, Michel Gondry, and Chris Cunningham's work, who I worship, by the way, who I am indebted to for my career. To this day, these three directors are my heroes. And this is a DVD set that I grew up watching. And I just wrote something. What did I write? I think the sentiment was, these are iconic works, but they exist and came about in a very different time from now. And how do we make work that is transgressive now, that is this daring? And who is this work made for? Because I think, to be honest, I think I shared that because part of me was grieving, because those DVD sets were like sold at Urban Outfitters. They sold this idea to the public that we could enter a creative field and make a commercial living and make artistically daring, cool work that changes culture. But as most of us have entered the workforce, we realize that is not the case. It's hard enough to survive financially, let alone be given work that changes culture. And a lot of it has to do with technology shifts, our political economic shifts. This is not the 90s or the 2000s anymore. And those directors that came about in their careers launched at a very specific moment in history, and they're all straight white dudes. And it was at a time when culture, the conversation about race, sexuality, gender, all of that was not where it is now. I think the thing is, we all get excited by work that changes culture. Like, if you can think about, ask yourself what the last, I mean, you could say feature film, but you could also say, what was the last short form work, music video, ad, short film that like made waves in our public consciousness? It's really hard. The list is very small. One example might be Harold Murray's This Is America video, right? Like, that hit the zeitgeist at the moment it needed to. The message was unflinchingly clear. But it's rare that we have these moments anymore, because we live in we call it the great foaming of content, where we're all in these content bubbles. All of our algorithms separate us now. So you can have someone with 25 million followers, but like, my mom doesn't know who they are. So we live in a great bubble society where everyone's in their own bubble algorithm. So how do we, as culture creators, make work that moves culture, broadly speaking, that cuts through? And I don't have the answer, but I will say, I do believe, I'm kind of a traditionalist. Is it Aristotle's I'm probably going to mess this up. 3 parts of what make a successful dramatic work: ethos, pathos, logos. That a good work is not only well crafted, practically speaking, but elicits an emotion, like pathos, like it actually moves you, and it's morally good, or it's like morally beneficial for society. If you can align those 3 things, then I hope at least that might be a template for what could move society in the right direction or move culture. As far as who is it for, I mean, yeah, I think that's critical to the question of how do we move culture, because we live in a situation where media is fractured and disseminated and tailored for viewers. I think that asking who you're making work for is the only way to make work that moves culture. It's that whole paradox where the more you try and avoid that question, the more ineffectual I think a work is. The more specific your story is, the more you actually hit on universal truth. So I think maybe if anything, the question was a call to action for people to tell their stories for themselves and for their own communities, because I think that's what will answer the first question, I hope.
Wow.
That's kind of a rambling answer, but any thoughts or responses on that?
It's just so wild for me to hear you say that, because I've been so fascinated with the idea that the most personal is the most universal. It's been something that I guess last year now I can say last year was like such a core revelation for me personally, and has helped me align more on the type of work I want to make and type of people I want to work with. And yeah, it doesn't surprise me that that came up in this conversation with you. And
yeah.
I hope that we see more of that. I think we need so much more of that for people to just lean into the most atomic parts of themselves and trying to really like not please wider audiences, because as you said so articulately, it's all so fractured that there's no point in trying to really appeal to anyone in a way.
Yeah.
Artistically, at least. Yeah, I think it's so brilliant.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
Andy, I'm just curious what it was like to direct an episode of Random Acts of Flyness.
Oh, yeah.
That show is so special and mesmerizing, and I just get inspired that it even exists.
Oh, yeah.
I am just curious to know what it was like for you to work on it, and also to like work in television.
It's a great question. I think Terrence Nance is a genius. I was a fan of the show when it came out, and I also was like, this is so brave and daring and cool and punk. And so when he asked me to be a part of it, it was like a no-brainer. So I was really honored to work with Terrence, and I learned a lot just by watching him problem solve and ideate, come up with ideas on the fly, and just also just reading his writing, I thought was really incredible and inspiring. And also, I think what I quickly learned is that Terrence is channeling something that is personal, spiritual, ancestral, and he asks that all of his collaborators do the same with him. I think it's a very generous way of operating. It's challenging. Like, he challenges us to go there with him, and I love that. And, you know, I was able to witness the speed and the challenges of working in a TV pipeline, the lack of time, the lack of resources, and maybe the more regimented aspects of shooting television. And I think some of the more out there ideas that we wanted to try were definitely challenged by some of our limitations. But I felt like, in spite of all that, Terrence was always thinking so expansively with what he had. And then when we screened a couple of the episodes at UTA, man, I think we all watched it, and I remember just some of the stuff Terrence got away with. I thought was so awesome and very, again, like punk. It felt like a very transgressive, considering that it was an HBO Warner Brothers project. I think to me, he's someone that I think is moving the culture needle in a way where it should go. I just felt very just honored to be in his sphere and to learn from him. And yeah, I left feeling very inspired.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for Terrence Nance's Space Jam.
A lot of the show, a lot of season 2 was in response to his experience on that. So if you kind of watch it closely, he's definitely sharing what that experience was like. I don't want to do too much speaking for him, but I'll just say, maybe it's honestly similar to working with Björk. It felt like the same energy of being so soaked in his universe and his world that he was building that you can't help but be on fire with him to make it. I think that's a real quality of a ultimate manifester. So I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I would just say that that's one of my favorite parts of being a DP, is like existing in someone else's universe. It can be so fun.
Yeah, it's like you're tripping together.
Yeah.
I love that. So Andy, in closing, I was curious, I mean, you have such this incredible body of work, and I wanted to know for you personally, if you can point to any project that was the most meaningful to you in terms of the artistic message, and then maybe one project that you're proudest of in terms of visual spectacle.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, just any thoughts on those two things?
I guess I can't help but say Kiss of the Rabbit God, even though it's not, I still have problems watching it, and I still have things I wish I did differently. I can't really watch it anymore, but it's still the most transformative and meaningful to me because it challenged me. It was much harder to do that than anything I had done previously. And technically, which I did the same year, was Cellophane. And Cellophane, I'm so technically proud of it. I'm proud of it. In a way, it was easier to do than Kiss of the Rabbit God because I knew exactly what I was doing. I storyboarded it. We pretty much shot it as storyboarded. And Twigs also makes it easy because Twigs is like so hardworking and everything she does on camera looks amazing. And that's all her on the pole, which she trained a year to do that routine. So I feel like it was a perfect marriage of a lot of things. So I'm just technically very proud of that.
I love that.
But emotionally, I was just much more vulnerable making the narrative that was frankly more personally inspired by my life. And so I think that maybe I'm just happy that those two opportunities arose the same year where I could even have the privilege of flexing both aspects of my skill set, I guess. So, yeah.
From like a cinematography standpoint, Cellophane blows my mind. The quality of light on her and the way that the camera is like infinitely revolving, and then the way it descends elegantly like into the mirror on the floor. I think all those things for a cinematographer are like so scary. The way that you all created that visual world is so brilliant, and the way the light reflects on the mud at the end, that final shot of her, like, I don't know, it's so visually brilliant. It's such a gorgeous piece.
Thank you. Yeah, that's kudos to Danny Abello, who shot that really stunning work that he did.
I love it. Well, Andy, I really seriously cannot thank you enough. This was such a refreshing conversation. We have so much to chew on here, and I think this is going to echo and resonate with so many of our listeners. And very grateful for your vulnerability and your wisdom and your generosity coming on and speaking with us. And your work is so inspiring to me and so unique and daring. And I'm personally very grateful to have gotten to talk to you. So thank you so, so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andy. This was amazing. Genuinely.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Just moved me. So thank you.
Thank you. That means so much to hear that. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
This episode of the Cinematography Salon podcast was produced by Peter Pascucci, Ava Benjamin Shorr, and David Kruta, with original music by One Wave and edited by Corey Abel. We created this episode in partnership with the Cinematography Salon, and we would like to extend a special thanks to the salon community for supporting our efforts with this show. We'd also like to extend our gratitude to Able Cine for their continued support. If you're unfamiliar with their offerings, Able Cine provides services such as equipment rentals, sales, maintenance, training, and much more. Additionally, they host complimentary events at their various locations. For more details, please visit ablecine.com. If you enjoyed listening to the show, we encourage you to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media to stay up to date with our latest episodes and news. Thanks.